Thanks. My name is John Wunderlich. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer with JLink. I'm also wearing my Cantera button, I call it, as the consent best practices management group and the consent receipt working group. I've been in privacy going on 15, 16 years and 10, 15 years of network experience before that. And so I'm going to talk a little about a protocol, the plumbing of the internet. And I'm Canadian, so I like to think of this as skating to where the puck is going to be, not to where it is now. So notice and consent doesn't scale, right? Everybody knows that. Nobody talks about it. The control we get from modern privacy regulations is like a distributed denial of service attack on our brains. If we've all read the statistics about if you actually read the privacy policies, if you actually had to click on the consent. So when I work in health and I work with research and consent, and a researcher sits down with you and says, I'm on the research ethics board for sick kids in Montreal, so sit down in Toronto. They'll sit down with a parent and there's a 15-page consent. Here's what it means to participate in this drug trial. That's notice and consent in a way that people understand it. But the way that we use it, and thank you, Alex, for sort of calling out Article 4. When we start to talk about legal terms of art, that's when we say consent. I don't think that word means what you think it means, right? In any kind of normal human interactions. And so how do you deal with that, right? Thank you for talking about APIs and that. How do you build an API system that works for the user, that provides what's effectively real consent in a meaningful way? And that's what we think we built with JLink. Alice and Bob, you remember Alice and Bob, right, from cryptographic circles? In privacy circles, I think Alice and Bob's relationship is broken because Bob is an abuser. But that's right? Because right now, Bob sets the terms and conditions. There's terms and conditions you have to agree to. These are not, they're not set by Alice. With the JLink, the underlying logic behind the JLink protocol is something we're calling a standardized information sharing agreement, which is available on the web, and I'll show you the links later, that basically says, in this relationship, when Alice says, I want to change something, Bob agrees to change it. It basically flips the terms and conditions on their head and puts the power of control in Alice's hands, the way we talk about it in the GDPR. And for the technical minded among you, it's recorded in JSON LD, cryptographically signed by both parties. So what does that look like? I cut this down from my 45-minute deck, so if people that are interested, I can run through a demo. But Alice sets permissions either through a web app or an application on the phone, where she says, here's my information, these are the channels that I'm willing to talk to. The options that she gets are set here on Bob's side, where he says, these are the data type requests that I want to ask of my clients. These are the consents, these are communication channels. Very much like what Alice was talking about. So this is set on Bob's side, that's a white label demo. Those options appear on Alice's unchecked as a customer. And every time Alice checks one of those toggles, says, yes, I'll accept marketing communications, no, I don't want to, that's pushed through the JLink protocol and implemented in Bob's system. We have a Salesforce app that running through Heroku, so that when Alice does this, it's not a matter of building a process. The implementation actually changes that in the CRM. So now the control rests entirely on Alice's side. That's why we call it permission data. Consent is built on the paradigm of, here's a block of data, it's going to go through some kind of gate, the gate is going to close, and you have to trust us on the other side of the gate to do the things that you've consented to. So that's fine, but in an API world, how many transactions do you do in a day? How do you, instead of going through that one-way gate, have an API working on your behalf. Now, the interesting thing about this is, here's the actual architecture at a high level, is going through the servers and the protocol. Every time there's a change, it generates a log entry. We can record it on blockchain, any audit, and that meets your Article 7 requirements, because every single time there's a change, you've got an audit trail of that. So a consent receipt can be generated at any time as the current state of consent between the two parties. Right? And that same audit trail provides you the complete authentication of what's the current state of consent now. So if the regulator comes along and says, how do you know that what you're processing is this? You've got the record on your side. So with that kind of implementation, it seems to me the founders actually built this as plumbing, as the kind of underlying protocol that others can build. We had to build the software because I think it was a little bit ahead of the curve a couple of years when it's done. But when Alex showed the OneTrust preference map, it's the same thing. And what I worry about, and just thinking in terms of the future, is who's tired of seeing cookie consents and cookie, right? And this is a crowd that wants to see cookie consents, right? Who's tired of having to click on consents, right? It just, how many consents do you have to give in a day? How many times you're just clicking through, right? OAuth screens or consents, right? This is, going back to, this is a user abusive system, right? Martin's, if you remember Martin's CIAM with the user, this one, that's a perfect system for that organization to talk to that user. But that user has relationships with how many different companies? So one of the things we're worried about is, you talk about cookie fatigue and consent fatigue. What about portal fatigue? Oh God, now I have to go to another company's portal and figure out how they work, so that I can manage my preferences at that company's portal. So what this protocol provides is a common API, so that the companies who use the protocol could build a common interface, so people will say, oh, I understand that because I've seen, just like OAuth, I've seen that kind of login before, I've seen this kind of consent management before. Because we're heading down a road with all these custom implementations of a place where, oh God, another portal that I have to figure out. Oh, what am I going to do? Right? Just click, 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 default, right? And another denial of service attack on the brain. We have to build a protocol and standards across this space so that we stop blaming the user. What do you mean you didn't read the consent? What do you mean you didn't do this? I remember a story, somebody from a New York hotel comes down and complains, I was taking a shower and somebody came in my room and took the wallet off my dresser while I was taking a shower. And the clerk looked at them and says, what are you, an idiot, leaving your wallet on your dresser? Of course somebody's going to come in, right? It's this, that we've walked ourselves so far out on the plank of depending on the user and overloading them with this. We have to figure out how to actually empower the user and leverage APIs and protocols to their benefit. And we think this is one option. Just to be clear, this will be an open standard. It's already published. If you go to the site, you can click on the links and see the protocol and the version 1 of the Standard Information Sharing Agreement. So yes, this is a sales pitch, but what we really want to do is invite all of you to go to jlink.com and sign up to try this for yourselves, either as a business or as a developer or as a user, to see if this makes sense for your company or for your use case, to build a common plumbing in, so we don't end up 5 years from now coming back and says, well, we've got 7 companies with 18 different interfaces. Why are people pissed off? Right. So, and with that, I hand it over to Josh.